Welcome to Landmark Talks Property, a podcast by Landmark Information Group that covers all things property in short and intelligent podcasts. This is the final episode in our mini-series, Development Due Diligence, The Power of Data and Expertise. In this episode, host Connie Alderson-Blench, Head of Professional Services at Landmark Information, is joined again by Sally Redman, Customer Success Consultant at Landmark Information, Key Evans, Partner at Foot Anstey, and Teresa Gonzalez-Rico, Associate Director at Atkins Realis. In this final conversation, the panel brings together everything explored so far, from early site constraints like flood risk to the wider data and expertise that shape confident development decisions. You'll hear how Landmark supports professionals working on complex development cases, including the moments where expert review becomes essential and the difference it makes in managing risk, uncertainty, and pace. We'll then move on to closing reflections, each guest sharing their final insights, the lessons they've learned from practice, and the future trends they think are worth watching as development continues to evolve. Let's begin.
So thinking then a little bit about how Landmark can support. So there are a lot of points in the development process where expert input becomes critical. But I think the biggest opportunities often come right at the start. And I feel like from this conversation, we're all agreed that a good consultancy isn't about fixing problems after the fact. It's about shaping decisions early on. So how do you think that consultants can add the most value at the earlier stages of a development scheme?
I mean, it's all about having that data up front, isn't it? And to be able to provide solutions to how they can solve those problems for anything that we've identified as a risk, being able to provide kind of clarity in terms of what those risks are, but also being able to shape kind of how they mitigate against those risks is really important, especially up front, so that they've got time to act on them. Because like you say, if we're working on more brownfield sites, then some of them are going to be really complex, and they need to understand that at the first point of call, really. So they've got time to actually work on it, so it doesn't slow down the process. Because typically,
I find all environmental things is unfortunately it's always left to the end, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately.
So yeah, I suppose that's having access to all that comprehensive data, and then also layering on that expert interpretation, bringing those together is really key. So I don't know. I mean, we're talking about like if you've got particular constraints, and I think we've talked about a lot about contaminated land. Wonder whether it's worth just talking a little bit about like flood risk as well, because that, I mean, you can just look at the news at the moment, can't you? And see actually that how many new build estates were built on floodplains and have flooded in the last few years. And I suppose with the introduction of climate change, what that flood risk looks like for developments.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something that obviously we deal with every day, is like looking at the flood risk and being able to assess that, but also how is it going to change once development's been built? Because we can say what the flood risk is like now, but once they start developing it, again, it's about shaping what they need to do in order for those houses not to flood in the future. But with that kind of also including data about climate change and how that might affect flooding again in the future. So before we're always just thinking about the flood risk and saying, this is what it's like now, and build your houses so that you won't be dealing with that type of flood risk for the present flood risk for those particular houses. But it's also having to think about how is climate change going to affect that, and that's something that kind of we can help out with, and so that we can give them solutions on how they can plan around that, where they put their development, can you have any kind of SUDs, for instance, that can move that water away from that development, and kind of house that water a little bit before it goes off. Because another thing is you don't want other places to flood as well as a result of reducing the amount of areas that can have it infiltrating into the ground. So it's about designing developments that kind of hold the water, slow the process down for the water to go, so that it holds it a little bit, to then be able to release it slowly so it's not flooding anywhere else as well.
Sounds very complicated.
It's kind of more about engineering solutions that are kind of innovative to deal with peak events that happen more and more often, right? So it's almost like, I mean, I like what you said about the fact that, we're not just doing a design for a 1 in 100 year flood as we understand historically, because predicting like the 1 in 1 year and 100 flood might be completely different in the next 20 years because of climate change. So I think that's a really valid point. But ultimately, knowing that is not going to help. I feel like that's where engineering solutions come in to actually mitigate the impact of that happening. And we kind of know that that's kind of happening more and more. So I feel like that's almost like slightly less about kind of digital and data, but more about how are we kind of using our ingenuity and engineering kind of, innovation to think about that. And then maybe also potentially there could be something more around monitoring water events. I don't know if it's flood, but just kind of understanding, how that the water makes its way across the country in different ways. And is there an opportunity to have mitigating kind of strategies that, you can trigger as soon as a particular type of water event kind of starts to become apparent? And I mean, I think that's where my knowledge kind of then starts to fade. But I think I feel like there is something to be said about that engineering solution piece, which we haven't really talked about. But, I'm a civil engineer. That's my kind of original background. So quite passionate about, just the pure kind of solutions that can help these problems. No?
Yeah, I think that's sort of taking us back to the planning system then, though, isn't it? Because that should be factored into the decisions on planning applications about whether it can be mitigated. And interestingly, about the wider areas that you were looking at there, that's sort of local planning, isn't it? If it's being done properly, that should form part of those kind of discussions about how water is moving around a particular area.
Yeah, and then like you said, also about making sure that what you've put in place is actually working, because if it isn't, then you need to be able to adapt to it and change. I mean, we have found in the past that there might be like a little bit more space for another house we put in, and so therefore they build on it, and it should have probably been a SUD or something like that. So, but the planning doesn't know anything about that necessarily, because we don't do the monitoring afterwards.
It should have been part of their planning conditions, though. Should
yes.
So that's sort of, if the planning system's working properly, then things like that should get picked up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that feedback loop back to the planning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it must be quite challenging as a planning officer to just have to think about all these things and these changing trends. But it does go back to that original decision, right? Or what information you have to make it. So.
And then I suppose it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about a way you can remove the simpler, easier, time-consuming tasks a planning officer has, so that they can concentrate on, the big developments that might need engineering solutions to make sure that, they're okay for the next, 50, 100 years, or however long we hope the houses or offices or whatever they are okay for. So I think it's probably about time that we sort of talk about closing thoughts. So I had just a question for everybody first, and then I would welcome some, last insights from you all. But if you could give one piece of advice to developers at the very start of a scheme, what would it be?
Oh, I don't want to be depressing at the end, but I think mine would be don't underestimate how long it can take. You just, be aware of the process and know the constraints that exist at the moment. I think that would have to be my key piece of information. For future trends, I'm personally really looking forward to the impact that AI used properly might have, and the benefits that we might see from that. I'm looking forward to seeing whether the changes that are being introduced now, this raft of planning amendments, do bear the fruit that we are hoping, and that we do see growth and new housing, new infrastructure coming forward. And from a personal perspective, what I'd really like to see is just more collaboration and cooperation with everybody that's involved in the development process to make it less siloed, so that we can all work together to get it happening. I know that's a difficult thing, but I think it's going to happen at some point, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Teresa.
Yeah, well, I echo a lot of that, of course. I think advice to developers, well, definitely, kind of not underestimating the amount of information that you can already get about one of the things that holds the most risk, which is the things you can't see, so the underground. So obviously, there is a lot of information that can be accessed about utilities, and I think it's really important to have an early view of that as much as possible, because a lot of that development risk is held under the ground. So, and of course with other aspects like contamination, etc. I think that in terms of kind of future trends, we're really big kind of supporters of collaborative approaches to delivery. Like I will echo that and kind of comment on it. I think especially in like the kind of end-to-end development process, you do see those silos really strongly, not just with, with immediately those organizations that are working through the process, but you have this massive kind of different kind of interests when you're kind of looking at the, capital expenditure versus operational expenditure, and kind of really saying the kind of the value across all of those aspects of development is where I feel like everyone should be focused more on. So like, we'll think about our kind of an asset throughout its life cycle, and then kind of think about that business case across it. And I know it's really difficult when your incentive is only within one stage of the process, to think finding ways to kind of bust those barriers across those, we're talking about entire supply chains that are completely differently incentivized. So to think I will echo collaboration throughout, and that can start from, just kind of having a small meeting with, your development team and the client team, and all the way to like really big kind of, hundreds of people kind of making that shift. So yeah, that, I guess that would be for me a really important kind of, success factor for the future.
I think my advice would be obviously to get environmental data in as soon as possible, because it does cause delays if something has been flagged in during the process. It's so important to have somebody interpreting that data so that we can enable better solutions to help them achieve what they want to achieve. And I think kind of future trends, obviously with Brownfield First and the Brownfield Passport that they've been talking about, it would be nice to see some more houses and development being built on brownfield sites. One thing that we're seeing as well at the moment are a few more kind of renewable energy projects. So we're seeing more solar farms being built, and kind of battery storage areas and EV charging. So I imagine hopefully there'll be some more projects like those. But again, being able to get the data up front before will really help speed up that process, because I know that they're wanting to increase the speed at those particular developments can be pushed through.
Thanks all. I thought that was a fantastic discussion. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again for listening to episode 4 of this mini-series from Landmark Talks Property, Development Due Diligence, the Power of Data and Expertise. We hope this series has given you a clearer view on the forces shaping development today and the balance between data and expertise that underpins confident decision making. Thank you again for tuning in, and we look forward to sharing more conversations with you in future episodes. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please hit subscribe. This podcast is for general information purposes only. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not constitute professional advice.